Hey, everybody, welcome to yet another edition of Head to Head, a Star Wars show. This week, that's right, we are doing our top 5 favorite weapons. So, are you ready to do this? Because this should actually be fun.
Oh yeah. Anytime we're
Because,
talking weapons, it's good.
yeah, well, the problem is nobody really talks about the weapons, if you think about it.
True.
Right? Like it's usually done where people talk about their top 5 Jedi or their top 5 Sith, or we did the top 10 bounty hunters, but nobody ever talks about the weapons.
Yeah.
So the weapons can include guns, it can include, any kind of weapon that either the rebels or the Empire or anybody basically used. And it's all coming at you right now. All right, hello everybody. I'm Eric Vansel,
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
and we're your hosts for this show. So again, we're basically doing our top 5 favorite weapons. So what you were the one that actually came up with this. So what inspired you to come up with this whole idea of doing this particular one?
It came from a very angry place. No. uh no, I mean, I've always loved like the different types of weapons that you see in Star Wars. I mean, it's kind of one of the cool things about it. Much like Star Trek, you see, you know, a lot of the people on the Enterprise have like phasers or whatnot, but then like all the other villains have like all these cool, weapons. So but Star Wars to me, has the most unique weapons of them all because, you got some of everything. Even if you're talking about blasters, I mean, there's like a bunch of different types of models of blasters. So you can't just say one blaster because it's not like there's a single brand or model that's used. All types are used. So
Yeah,
I
you
thought
know
this was
what?
really cool.
What's funny is on a couple of them, I actually I had to look up the model.
Yeah, the model
'Cause,
number.
you can't just say, "Okay, it's like this guy's," or whatever the case may be. I mean, you gotta be I mean, if we're gonna sit here and do an
Right.
actual countdown, it's like, okay, we gotta try to be legitimate about this and put in
Definitely.
some research, even though it's funny because for some reason, it's like we always talk about how busy our schedules are, and then well, let's stream twice a week now,
I know, right?
as if that's gonna really help and make things better, right? So, why don't you go ahead with your number 5?
My number five weapon is the bowcaster.
The
Um,
bowcaster, man. This
yeah.
is
This
good.
this thing is rocking. So the bowcaster pretty much is like this. I guess like a Star Wars version of a crossbow, and essentially like those two orbs that kind of sits on the side, kind of creates like this magnetic field that creates like this energy. And so like when the cock ring is pulled back or the trigger, it kind of fires that, and so it's like this huge plasma bolt or plasma energy that's actually more powerful than any of the traditional blasters. So that's why when you see it actually in use, which we got a chance to see in the sequel trilogy, I
Mhm.
mean, yeah, that thing was like picking people off like left and right. And even Han got a chance to shoot it, and he really loved that thing. So
Yeah, well, and you know what's funny is that I actually, because obviously the cliche thing to do would have been to just, okay, find a photo that had Chewie, using the bowcaster, because it
mhm.
should be pointed out that Chewbacca is the main person that we see. I'm sure, I think it's actually like a Wookiee type of a thing.
Yeah, it's
Isn't that
actually,
it?
yeah, it's more indigenous to the Wookiees because of the weight of it. It's really heavy. And so that's what makes it kind of cool for the Wookiees because they're them being super strong. You know, if someone wanted to use the bowcaster on someone, most of them really probably couldn't do it. Although you do get a chance to see Han do it, so it kind of tells you how strong Han is, really.
And I have
But
to say, I mean, and that's one of the reasons why, like I said, I didn't want to go for the cliche thing because Han did get to use it a lot, which was one of really, I mean, I don't know if anybody else really feels this way, but it was always been one of my fanboy dreams to see Han Solo using the bowcaster. Don't ask
yeah,
me why. I
and the
just,
crazy the
you
crazy thing we
know,
never got a chance to see Chewie use it in the original trilogy.
really?
I don't think they showed him like aim it, but I don't think we really get to see like the devastating power of that
Well,
thing.
he uses it in Return of the Jedi, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, when on the Battle of Endor. you
But I
know,
know what you mean, though. It's kind of like for such a cool weapon, the thing is totally underutilized.
yeah.
It's like you go through the trouble. And this is the thing that sometimes this just goes to show the actual world building here of George Lucas, because he goes through all this trouble to get every detail,
Hmm.
right? Coming up with all these cool characters, weapons, planets, whatever the case may be. And a lot of times they might be on screen for only, a couple of seconds, sometimes even a couple of frames. And yet there's a backstory behind every single thing. And
Right.
this is a great example. It is Chewbacca's crossbow, which is the bowcaster. It's like this thing is a really cool, legit weapon. And it is, I feel like it's been underutilized in the films as well.
Yeah, and it's pretty powerful. And it kind of once again, you and I have always talked about this. It shows how powerful Kylo Ren was because he actually kind of took a hit from that
Yes.
thing.
Yes, and I'm glad that you put this on the list because even though, and I have to say, like right from the get-go, this was a very difficult list for me to put together. Because let's face it, there's just so many cool weapons in the Star Wars universe.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And it's funny because like with bounty hunters, I remember we're like, let's do the top 10 bounty hunters. And then I'm thinking, man, there are 10 though, right? I mean, it's like, what if there's like only 8, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, man, am I gonna have to dig real deep in the expanded universe and whip out all my old books and trying to get a name? But honestly, it wasn't that bad. I mean, there was a lot of bounty
Hmm.
hunters that I could have included, some of them you included.
Hmm.
But, it could have gone either way. And weapons, it's the same thing. At first, I was like, well, there's the pistol, there's the blaster, and
Hmm.
there's all kinds of different weapons that are familiar. But I really wanted to do the top 5. One, because, I didn't want us to be here for like 4.5 hours. But
Right.
the other thing is that I really wanted us to pare it down. Like, what are our favorites? Because remember, I have
Yeah.
to say this at the onset. Well, actually, I should say this, right? If you guys like this video, like what you see, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and of course, hit us up at Head to Head SW on all social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. But I should also say that one of the things that I wanted to do was make sure that we emphasize that this is our favorite weapons. We're not saying that like, these are the best or you
Hmm.
guys might go, well, okay, they got this at number 2, but clearly the number 5 could probably take out the first, or something like that
Right.
with power. I mean, try to understand that we were doing this based on our favorite, like what really grabbed us. And I have to say, man, I could have put the bowcaster on here. I could have, because number 1, it is an extremely powerful weapon. It's
Hmm.
it's a unique weapon. And it was one of those things that it was really cool to see Han Solo run around with it, I have to say.
Definitely.
So it's interesting because, you did that for your number 5, Chewbacca's bowcaster, right?
Right.
For my number 5, I ended up choosing Han Solo's DL-44 blaster.
Han and Chewie doing it again.
Yeah, well, this is one of those weapons, and I know a lot of people could sit there and go, "Oh yeah, of course he's going to choose Han Solo's weapon, right?" But I have to say, when I was thinking back, and I suppose if I'm being honest, there might be a small part that is due to the fact that yes, Han Solo, other than maybe Vader, is my favorite character.
Hmm.
But I was always really fascinated by his pistol. Oh, that didn't sound good at all.
Wasn't gonna
That
say
right there.
anything.
See, now that
I
that should be
just
the I should retitle. If I want to get a bunch of views on this thing, I should retitle this episode. Fascinated by. I mean, I am though.
did he still shoot first? All right, I'll stop.
Oh,
I'll
ouch.
I'll
Well,
stop.
you'll have to watch the special edition and find out.
Oh, no thanks.
Well, this just took a nasty little turn. But I mean, Han Solo's not, I can't even say it with a straight face now. Han Solo's blaster, let's put it that way. I always thought was very unique because if you look at, let's see, Greedo had one that was similar, but the Bespin ones, the Bespin pistols,
Oh yeah,
some of the Clone Wars pistols, although they were elegant or whatever, Han Solo's had like kind of a unique look to it.
his kind of remind me of like it had like a revolver like hilt
Yeah,
to it, but then at the
exactly.
same time, it kind of remind me a little bit like a RoboCop's pistol.
Oh, I could see that. You know, RoboCop's pistol though looks a little bit. It kind of reminds me of a combination of Solo's blaster and then maybe like a Stormtrooper blaster too.
Yeah.
I mean, his is definitely cool, and I mean that's the thing too is that I think it's a little bit harder now. Like when Lucas was, doing all this stuff back in the day, there really wasn't a whole lot going on. In fact, you could argue that Star Wars is basically like the template for a lot of laser
Mhm.
pistols and sci-fi type stuff. I mean, it's true you did have Star Trek, and I also thought that that was a really cool thing. And I'm glad you brought up that this was a revolver style because the temptation would be to go the sci-fi route. What
Mhm.
do you see every single time you see a sci-fi movie? You see these ray guns that, shoot either these like ring-like things or kind of like the phasers in Star Trek.
Right.
You see things like that, right? Whereas Lucas wisely, once again, he went with the familiar. If you look at all the things in Star Wars, a lot of the stuff is familiar. It
Mhm.
doesn't look all futuristic and space agey. I mean, sure, you got ships and things like that, but they follow like a um
Kind of
more of
like
an earthly architecture.
yeah, I would say that. Yeah, definitely. That's definitely the best way to explain it.
Yeah, they're not all rounded and all this other stuff that you look at whenever you see pretty much like a futuristic type of a show. And I thought that it was great that because Han Solo was basically the original Star Wars gunslinger, he had a weapon that was basically fit for that. I mean, how did you basically, like when you first saw it? Because if I'm not mistaken, I mean, other than that little stun rifle or whatever, well, it was actually just like a blaster, but they set it to stun.
Mhm.
Leia's pistol, Leia's was kind of
Yeah.
interesting.
She kind of had that James Bond Doctor Nope.
Yeah, exactly. It was sort of like and it was, I get it. They were trying to use something because at first a lot of people were like, oh, yeah, that's kind of like a woman's weapon or something like that. But
Mhm.
I actually think it was more to do with concealment and things like that.
Sure. I mean, it's sleek. It can fit to her leg if she needed to, because based on the clothes that she wore. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like when you brought up the point about George Lucas really thinking about, all these different things. Yeah. I mean, you have to think about like, why is this unique to this particular character? Like Han's
Hmm.
pistol fits him.
Right.
It's one of those things where it's kind of made. If you think about it, like I said, it has a revolver handle, which if you think about the Westerns, that's what Star Wars was. It was kind of like a space Western a little bit. Han is kind of dressed like, a sheriff basically in the old West. I
Exactly.
mean, and so then the way he even draws his weapon and he points it, it's almost like he's always dueling. He's always got that one hand out and the other one is like pointing. And so it's once again, just the mannerisms of the characters are very unique. So you kind of have like, samurai stuff with lightsabers, but then you also have like Western gunslingers, and then you have typical like military style guys. So you have a little bit of everything in Star Wars. He
Yeah,
kind of
it's great.
and he's kind of like Clint Eastwood with the thing. It's
Oh,
almost
completely.
like a 44 Magnum, man. That thing is this, and that's why I find it funny is DL-44.
Yeah,
You see what I'm
I
saying?
never,
Like
yeah, I
it's a
never
Clint
even thought
Eastwood
of.
thing. Yeah. So
I mean, and it's so funny too because right now, there's probably people out there that are just going, "Oh man, I can't believe these guys can go on for like 20 minutes about, just those guys." But these are the kinds of things that we like to talk about. Again, just to reiterate, because I think sometimes people don't really understand this show a lot, because I remember somebody was like, "Oh, you don't really have a whole lot of shorter videos, do you?" It's like, no, this is a Star Wars discussion show. This is the kind of show where we elaborate on things, we talk about philosophical stuff. We get really inside the details. You're not going to see, this is not one of those jump cut type shows where we're trying to make a point inside of like 10 minutes.
mhm.
It's basically like an extension of what we used to do with our audio podcast, but it's video. So if you guys are watching this live, chat in, join the discussion. if you guys are watching the rebroadcast, leave a comment. I got to say that we get a lot of comments on our videos, sometimes even older videos. And it's great because I just love the fact that, sometimes people comment on an older video and I'm like, oh, yeah, it's because you get so wrapped up in doing these shows, you just don't really think about it. But okay, what is your number 4?
The number 4 spot. This is another very powerful weapon. It's the disruptor rifle.
If he can say it.
Right. It's a disruptor rifle wielded by none other than the Mandalorian himself, Din Djarin. This thing, man, I always was curious as to, because you always see it on his back. When they were, promoting the series, you kind of see it slung to his back. And I'm just wondering, like, man, are we going to get to see that thing in action? And, it's got this like fork prong thing at the front. So you kind of wonder what this thing does. And man, Jesus Christ, when this thing starts firing those like those heavy rounds to the point when he started picking off Jawas and they're just like completely disintegrating, I was just like, oh yeah, now that's a rifle.
Well, the thing that's funny about this thing, and I'm glad you put this on the list too, because pretty much the first time we see this thing, believe it or not, is that dreaded Star Wars holiday special from 1978.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the animated part where they introduced Boba Fett. Yep. That's where we actually see this thing for the first time. And it's interesting to me because even then you're looking at it, and with a cartoon, especially something that was done in the 70s, you're like, okay, you're not really sure what this thing can do. But then you flash forward to The Empire Strikes Back, and then Vader, of course, makes a point to say to Boba Fett, no disintegrations.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, as you wish. And, I don't know about you, but I mean, the first time that he said that, I'm like, well, that's kind of specific.
Exactly. Like, why did he specifically point to him?
Right.
Like, he's known for that.
Right. Like, he's out there. It's kind of like, okay, apparently this guy's really into disintegrations. But you flash forward to the Mandalorian and you got Din's weapon, who's using a disruptor rifle as well.
Mm-hmm.
And now, for the first time, you see in some live action presentation what this thing is capable of. And wow, you know?
Yeah, when he started popping Jawas like left and right,
exactly.
I was like, holy crap, dude.
It was like little Jawa popcorn or something. I mean, it was like the weirdest. I was kind of, what do you even do against that? I actually was starting to feel bad for them. Because you're basically just, you're facing this guy. And it can't feel good.
Yeah, well, they're totally defenseless against that thing.
Completely.
That's why they were trying to hurt me getting that giant transport carrier they always run in the end.
Well, and my thing is, and here's the question that I have about this thing. It's like, on one hand, I'm like, okay, how powerful is this thing? Like, what can it disintegrate?
Exactly.
Like if you tried to do Jabba, would it struggle a little bit?
Right. He might need a few more rounds into him.
Do you need to like maybe up the caliber or something? Or, what if you just decided you wanted to, what if you shot a vehicle with it? Would it disintegrate part of it?
Right.
Is it only disintegrating biologicals?
Yeah.
Again, and honestly, yes, everybody, these are things that do occur to me, not on a regular basis, not like every single time I watch this thing, or I'm not dwelling on this, day and night or something. But periodically, since we're focusing on the weapons and we're talking about this is one of the things that I wonder. And it does what I think a lot of the Star Wars weapons do. It makes you want to see more of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's really easy. And again, Star Wars is more sci-fi fantasy, but it's easy in any kind of an action type of a movie or a TV series or something that involves weaponry, right? To just come up with the cliche weapons. And honestly, if Star Wars had used weapons that were a little bit more pedestrian in nature, like just a little bit more generic, it would still be all right.
Yeah, I mean, when you really description of this thing, it's like it tore apart its victims at the molecular level,
That just
destroying their
does not sound unpainful.
destroying their body tissue and bypassing most sorts of personal energy shields. It's much like a miniature seismic charge, as a distorted sound in its explosion had a distinct horizontal shockwave.
Ouch.
So,
By the
yeah,
way, did I just say unpainful? I mean painless. Wow, I made up a word. I don't
gotta write that
usually
down.
I know, I don't usually do that. But see, again, these are the kinds of things that I look at too, is that yes, this does not sound like a painless thing. It's ripping you apart on the molecular level. That's why I always question every time that I watch Star Trek. I know.
Wrong show.
Sorry.
I know.
I know. But if you think about their beaming technology,
Hmm.
it's essentially blasting you down to the atomic level and then transporting those atoms and then putting you back together. You
Yeah.
cannot convince me that doesn't hurt. You know?
It
I mean,
just
how
tingles
is
a little
that
bit.
different from this weapon? That's what I want to know.
Well,
Other than the fact that it's putting you together.
I think it's kind of calmly doing it versus violently dispersing your atoms. It's probably the difference.
Calmly doing it. Because everybody, if you disperse the atoms slowly, it's
Right.
less painful.
Exactly.
Or maybe it floods you with like some sort of analgesic or something. I mean, some pain killing thing. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I always wondered, and nobody really addresses that.
Right.
See, at least this, it's a weapon.
Right.
It's definitely a weapon. So your number 4 is actually
Yes.
very cool, I think.
Thank you.
I like it. I concur. So my number 4, we're going to start to go a little bit now into the more melee style weapons, and that is the vibro vulge.
Mm.
Now, you have to understand, this thing is basically not what you see the royal guards carrying, but the Praetorian guards, Snoke's guys.
Hmm.
And actually, each one of them carried a slightly different variation. There's the vibro like whip.
Yep.
There was a couple other. There's also vibro blades. There's a lot of vibro stuff. In fact, what I almost put in its place was like that vibro staff thing that you saw Grievous's guys wield.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
And basically like the offshoot of that would be the one stormtrooper, traitor,
Oh yeah.
that guy. And then so I was always fascinated by all those weapons, but this one's kind of cool because it sort of has the spirit of that stuff, but it's actually like a blade.
Hmm.
And it's really interesting to see the fighting style of this stuff. And that's why I'm really happy that they have expanded a little bit the melee style weapons in
Yeah,
Star Wars,
even the Knights of Ren kind of had a version of this.
Yeah, well, and it's the thing. And if you read the comics and you read, especially the expanded universe and stuff like that, or well, I shouldn't say that now, but I mean like the new canon
Right.
books, but particularly the comics. I'll stick with the comics on this because they're a little bit more visual. You see a ton of these type of weapons.
Hmm.
Like if you actually start reading the comic series, you start like, I mean, there's just like so many different weapons. You're kind of like, okay, what's this now? What movie was that in? I don't remember this. Now, the expanded universe books and comics were notorious for this. They created like just a plethora of stuff, right? Whereas here, it's a little bit more controlled. And now, of course, with the High Republic coming out, and I was tempted. I almost picked a weapon or two from the High Republic, but I refrained because it's still a little bit too new.
Hmm.
And I can't really say anything's my favorite because even if I had finished Light of the Jedi, which I haven't even started, but I've read like one issue of one comic. So, I mean, it's a little bit early, I think, to start going, yes, this is my favorite weapon of all time. This is definitely my number 4. It's this thing that we just were introduced to last month. Nah, that's not going to happen. But And I was trying to get some of the stuff from all over the saga too, but I wasn't even trying to, go overboard with that. I don't know about you. I mean, of course we could do our whole, this is how we came up with our list. Like, I think that's going to be a thing that we're going to do for all these lists, but I will let out this one little nugget of information. And that is that I wasn't trying to make sure that I balanced the prequels, the original trilogy, it's really about what are the top 5 weapons that made an actual impression on me. And I would assume that's probably what you did too.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So this one, again, the guards, both the Royal Guards and Praetorian Guards, I think that they're not quite as I don't really want to say they're underappreciated or underrated, because I don't necessarily feel like that, but I do think that they're not at the forefront of most people's minds when they think of who were some of the best warriors in Star Wars, which, I mean, that could end up being a list. But I mean, these guys, what they did, and then their weapons, and then their skills with those weapons. I like anything that's a little bit beyond just the normal cliched weapons that we see. And, don't get me wrong. Some of those quote unquote cliched weapons are going to appear quite high on my list. But at the same time, I have an appreciation for the more inventive weapons that Star Wars comes up with. Definitely. Okay, so what is your well, you're number 3 now.
Mm-hmm.
See, look, I can count everybody. All right, so what's your number 3?
It's an elegant weapon for a more civilized time. Yes, the lightsaber.
Ah, yes. A Jedi's weapon.
Yes.
Well, in this case, a Sith weapon. So you notice how on this picture I actually depicted Vader, right?
I appreciate that.
In the cool scene that you like. I mean, I was thinking about this stuff. When you gave me your list of weapons, I tried to get photos that represented what it is that you liked and what I thought that you do. Not that I'm, trying to, again, break my arm, patting myself on the back and saying what a good friend I am or anything like that. But I think it's important, though, because when you're choosing something like the lightsaber, the first conversation is going to go, well, whose lightsaber?
Right.
And which style of lightsaber, right? Because we could actually do, and we sort of did this on one of our normal shows. We could actually go to like top 5 lightsaber hilts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's
definitely.
Sure. I mean, there's like a lot of them, man. I mean, each one is different, and then the way the blade is kind of different. So talk about your lightsaber.
Well, the lightsaber, man, is once again like that screams Star Wars. I mean, you can't almost talk about Star Wars without talking about the lightsaber. It's the first time I saw it, man, I was just like, whoa, the heck is that? And I want it. The first time I saw Luke fire that thing up, I'm just like, oh, okay. And then, but until you finally see the first duel between like, okay, Obi-Wan and Vader had a red one and Obi-Wan had a blue one. So, oh, they come in different colors now too. It's like, sweet.
That's true, because, well, you get a little bit of a hint because you basically see Obi-Wan's, I think, is the first one that's ever ignited in the cantina.
Oh, no, but
are you sure?
He gave it to Luke first.
Was that before the? Oh man, this is really embarrassing.
Yeah. So
okay, so Luke. Yeah,
he the hut and he's like, this is your
father. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So the first time you see it in action is the cantina, though.
Yeah, well, that's really more what I'm talking about. That's what I meant.
Well, yeah,
so not the actual first time. Yeah, the actual first time you see it ignited was when Luke.
But
Luke did it in the hut.
Definitely in the cantina scene when he lopped off, the arm, and I was just like, whoa. So that's the first thing that kind of got me like really hopped up on it. But then, of course, when you see the duel between he and Vader. And I was completely enthralled as a kid. I was like, if nothing else had me hooked, it was that moment. I was like, okay, yeah, this is sweet. Well, and I didn't know it came in another color.
No, and I think one of the important things to note here too is that you have to go back, especially in my case, you have to go back to when this movie was released and understand that you never saw anything like this.
Right.
You know, I mean, how many swashbuckling sword fight things or whatever, have you seen either in martial arts movies or,
The pirate.
your pirate or like Errol Flynn type thing, the stuff
Mhm.
that's going back to all the classic films or whatever, you see a lot of different movies and things that were done where you had these classic sword fights. But when you see a lightsaber and more importantly, you see this, I mean, that just adds. And if you think about it, the duel in episode 4 was not really all that spectacular as far as a
Nope.
duel goes or the movements.
Mm-mm.
But what just elevated it beyond even the most exciting normal sword fight was these weapons
Yeah.
that you
And the
would
fact,
never seen.
well, the other thing too, it kind of made you wonder because, all right, you kind of get introduced to Vader. You get introduced to Vader in episode 4, and
Mhm.
he has a force because he's choking, um, people and whatnot. But then it's just like, okay, you never notice that he has a lightsaber that's hanging from his belt.
That
You
is
never,
true.
you never really notice that until, and then like Obi-Wan has it, so you're thinking like, okay, well, he's a good guy. He's got the sword thing, but then when he confronts Vader, he's walking around with the hilt. And Vader just standing there with his igniter, like he's already ready. And I'm just like, whoa, he has one too. So it kind of made you wonder, like, well, who the heck is Vader really? So it revealed so many questions about him because it's like just based on his weapon, oh, he's got the same sword thing that Luke and Obi-Wan have. Okay, well, who the heck is this guy now? And so until you really start to learn more about his character, you're like, oh, okay, he used to be a Jedi and blah 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 blah. So but then as you kind of go down the line, now you start getting into the prequels. You starting to see, well, actually, as you continue on through the rest of the trilogy, the original trilogy, when you see Luke pop up with the green one, and you're like, oh, sweet, like he's got a green blade now. Because first we only thought it came in blue and red.
I know
Now
now
Luke,
you're just like, okay, and now, just somebody tell me how many of these things there are. But then again, what's really funny is the action figures are what really jacked us up.
mhm,
Anybody that grew up during my era, which is the original era of Star Wars, knows what I'm talking about. Because if you look at the action figures of Luke Skywalker, it was yellow, like bright yellow.
mm,
We're talking like canary yellow. And then somebody had something like an orange. And then, they just like they kept making all these weird colors, right? And you're just
mhm,
going, okay, well, and then of course you had the expanded universe, which talked about a gazillion different colors, but you really didn't see a lot of variation until maybe the prequels. But
mm,
you're right, that progression that you describe is exactly what everybody was thinking. Even those of us who sort of grew up with this thing like from the very beginning, it's like, okay, Luke ignites his, and then it's kind of like a whitish type of thing, sort of like a white yellow. I think it was supposed to be blue. I just think the effects were kind of
off a
weird
little.
because if you look at it, it's supposed to be Anakin's lightsaber, and his was blue.
Mhm,
So now you go, okay, his is blue, Obi-Wan's is blue. Whoa, this guy's is red.
yep.
And red is my favorite color, so I
Yeah.
was all about that.
Yeah, and then when you finally get to like, okay, so you get to Return of the Jedi, you got the green one, but then you go to the prequels. Now you're seeing like, okay, now you got Darth Maul. He's got a double bladed one. Never seen that before, so we're just like, holy crap. Then after that, now you're seeing, Dooku with his style. Then you have Mace Windu. He's got a purple one, and you're just kind of like, well, and so you see all the different styles, you see the different hilts, um, and the different styles of way that people fight with them. And so, I've always been a huge, huge fan of, lightsaber duel. So that's why it's my number 3.
I can see that. And I mean, just to before we move on to my number 3, pretty much what all the things that you're saying are one of the things that I took into account, particularly through the prequels, is the fact that this is where you start to hone in a little bit. There's different lightsaber fighting styles. There's different lightsabers as far as the color. And
Hmm.
then the Clone Wars animated series especially starts to go into like, okay, here's all the crystals and that affects, and then what you're thinking or feeling is affecting the color. I mean, it's just like there's all this lore that's attached to it now.
Right.
Back then it was like, okay, these guys get the blue one, these guys get the red one.
Right.
And then Luke is like, okay, well, there's green. But I mean, and it's true. It's funny how that actually transpired. I mean, again, we can do a whole show on lightsabers. So my number 3, yeah, right. My number 3 basically is going to be the introduction of the, let's just say, macro style weapons. My number 3 is actually the Death Star. Yeah, I had to go with the Death Star. Now, it could have been a little bit higher. It could have been a little bit lower on the list. I mean, that was profound. That's almost like Madden going, well, the guy with the most points, that's how you win the game. It's like, okay.
You don't say.
So yes, it could have been higher, could have been lower. But the reason why I point that out is because I was really torn, because in my top 3, because we are down to the top 3 now, I'm trying to think of the things that made the greatest impact on me and what became my favorite over time. And the Death Star, and I chose this picture because this is the first time in Rogue One, this is when we start to see the Death Star being a little bit more mobile, which is kind of weird when you think about it, because the way they acted in episode 4, which I realize takes place like probably a week, or I mean, it pretty much goes right up against Rogue One, right? But it's like, okay, it's almost like, yes, we're finally ready to unleash this so people can see this ultimate power. And I'm like, okay, dude, you just like a week ago completely torched Jakku. And then you're going to Scarif and, you're doing some stuff there. Yeah, it's like, I think people are getting the memo here. But again, I almost actually put the Return of the Jedi one, the Death Star 2. It was really tough for me because on one hand, I love the Death Star 2 because I really like the idea that it was unfinished. But being that we're going for top 5 favorite weapons and not like top 5 favorite moments that have weapons or something like that, I decided to go for, of course, the classic original Death Star. And again, this is another weapon that people really, I mean, when you really stop and think about it, I think a lot of times Star Wars fans have gotten jaded as far as, because now it's kind of like, oh yeah, this is like another Death Star. This is a Death Star, but on this. And it's almost like how we describe movies using Die Hard. Oh, look, it's Die Hard on a bus, or it's Die Hard in space, or it's, that kind of thing.
Right.
And this is sort of the same type of deal. Oh, it's the Death Star, but it's got this, or it's the Death Star, that it's that same kind of descriptive mechanism. But again, if you really stop and think about a weapon that could take out a planet with one blast, you got to give it to that. And this is another thing that we've never seen. I mean, if you look at sci-fi movies from before Star Wars and even fantasy and stuff like that, you never had a moon-like thing that was floating around space and able to destroy an entire planet with just one blast. And we see it. And it's not like it's some, just esoteric kind of thing. I mean, Leia watches her home planet getting destroyed by this thing, and there's actual drama and emotion behind it. There's consequence, which I think is awesome that we're seeing this even in as late as The Mandalorian with Cara Dune.
Yeah.
I mean,
I love when she makes that reference to it too.
Yes. I mean, I think that that's just a great thing. I love the fact that they deal with this. I love the fact that they talk about it, that this is an ongoing thing, because one of the complaints that I have about a lot of franchises, and I was glad to see that Marvel was starting to do this with the Avengers Age of Ultron, is that something happens and it's like, you know what? No, it's going to have lasting effects.
Yeah.
You can't just blow up a planet and everybody's like,
Oh,
okay.
okay. Right.
Like there's nobody that's affected by this. It's like you got an entire planet of displaced people, number one. And number two, well, I mean, kind of the ones that weren't on the planet anyway.
Right.
And then, of course, this is going to be something that haunts them. They're not just going to get past this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, essentially, it's a Holocaust.
Yes, it is the ultimate genocide, but you're not just wiping out the people, you're wiping out the entire planet.
Exactly.
And I think that that's something that a lot of times, even as Star Wars fans, I don't think we really sit down and think about that. And for that reason, it's always been one of my favorite weapons. You know, everybody kind of dogs out the Death Star now because everybody goes, well, it's cliche. But, you know, I'm like, look, bombs are cliche. But yet every country in the world is trying to build a bigger, better one.
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody, you know, sitting there telling all these world leaders going, well, you know, the bomb is just, that's kind of like, that's been done. You know, that's sort of like a World War II thing. You guys need to come up with something more inventive. Nobody says that. Why? Because it works.
It's effective. Yeah.
Exactly. This is kind of what you do. You need to blow up a large surface area or whatever in order to conquer it. You know, it's better than sending a bunch of people and losing a bunch of soldiers. Well, the Empire basically did it better than anybody else. They're like, hey, guess what? We can hang out over here on this little moon-sized space station.
Everyone
Shoot
look out
a
your
laser.
windows.
Yeah,
Like
everybody,
fireworks.
exactly. If everybody would please look outside your port side windows, you will see the destruction of this planet. So, I mean, I just think that for that and the fact that it did make such an impact, because remember, I was like 6 years old when I saw this, but even as I got older, and this is what happens with Star Wars if you let it. A lot of fans don't let this happen, but if you let it, what will happen is you will look back on these things that you've been seeing over and over, and you'll have a deeper appreciation. As a 6-year-old, I wasn't thinking about the Death Star the way I do now, but it's still my number 3. So we're going into the top 2.
Top 2.
Top 2. All right. What's your number 2?
Well, I'll see your Death Star and I'll raise you a Star Killer base.
Yes. Yes, you are. Look at how evil that thing looks.
Yeah, man. I mean, that thing is massive. And the fact that this thing was like carved into like the side of a planet, moon, basically. That thing is kind of crazy.
It is. And I think that it gets unfairly criticized. Look, I will be the first person to say that as much as I love The Force Awakens, it has some problems. I mean, it doesn't have Last Jedi level problems, but it does have some of its problems. And I think people do unfairly criticize this thing as being a little derivative because it's really more of a repeating of a motif or whatever. But I really think that people don't give enough credit to Star Killer Base.
Well, the thing is, what's funny about that statement you just made is that they knew that.
I know. They put it in the movie.
Yeah, so that's why Han said was like, well, let's do what we normally do, just find a way to blow it up, and I thought that was hilarious.
That is like the best. You know what? There was some great lines in there.
One is the fact that it came from Han Solo, because that's totally what Han Solo would say.
Completely what he would say.
And then it's just
like, well, it's kind of like a Death Star, right? I mean, sure, it's bigger, but let's just blow it up like we did all the other ones.
It's a big deal,
Yeah, what's everybody making a big deal about it? Just blow it up.
At least this one doesn't move, and that's the other thing that's different about this versus the Death Star is that it's stationary. However, they perfected the blast thing off that thing where now not only can it just travel like miles and miles to hit a planet, it can hit multiple planets at the same time. So when you're seeing Star Killer Base and it's taking out like 3, 4, 5 planets at a time just from drawing all its power from the sun, and you're just like, no, that's a space station right there, man. But the only limitation that it has is that it's stationary. But I often wonder, like, what's its range? Like, how far away?
Yeah, I mean, I have
can
to
it
say,
actually hit?
I have mixed feelings about Star Killer Base because on one hand, for all the reasons that you said, I think it's kind of cool.
Hmm.
The only thing that stopped me from putting it on my list, I mean, spoiler, it's not on my list, is that pretty much it has a lot of issues for me. I don't like this whole idea that it's drawing from the star to get its power and then shooting it back out. That's a little bit clumsy to me. This is one of the few things in Star Wars that actually makes me think of the mechanics and how it works, and it kind of ruins it for me. And then
Mm.
that's the other thing too, is that okay, yeah, you can destroy like 5, 6, 7, whatever planets it is, but exactly what is the range? Because it's kind of like, okay, you're a threat to these planets, and then once you've destroyed them, now what? I
Right.
would have preferred that they had put this thing. I guess it would have been tough though, because just of the power they have to have. If they found a way to make it mobile. But the other side to this though is that I do think that it is interesting how they did try to make it different. It's stationary, it's more powerful, it's like a different slant on it, and it seems like something the First Order would do.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I liked about it is the fact that when you're on it, it's basically kind of like a messed up planet.
Yeah.
It's not like a mechanical type of thing like the Death Stars were.
Hmm.
I mean, when you land on it, it's like, oh, look, snow and trees. And because essentially, it's like you said, it's this thing that's
Big.
pretty much carved out into a planet. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why I chose this particular photo too, because it's like, wow, you look at it and you're just like, man, how do you even build something like this?
Well, apparently this thing actually can the energy beam travels sub hyperspace.
See, this is what I love too. When I yammer on about something, it gives you time to actually look things up, and so we can sound, reasonably knowledgeable about such things. Well,
Yeah,
that
so
makes sense because it just seemed like there were too many limitations on this thing that somebody had to have thought this through.
and the thing is, what makes that kind of what makes it a little bit more freaky now that I know that is that if you have it where it's traveling sub hyperspace,
Mhm.
that means you don't even see this thing coming. Because at least the Death Star, like, okay, something pops out of hyperspace. One, you got radar where you can see something that it might pick it up like soon as it comes out of hyperspace. But if you're like halfway across the galaxy and then all of a sudden out of nowhere this beam just hits your
It's
planet,
like the Death Star sniper.
yeah, basically.
You're just walking down and your head explodes like a coconut. And that's kind of, pretty
Yep.
much like, we're just doing the show and all of a sudden, boom, we get hit
Boom.
with some laser.
Like everything's just vaporized, like,
Mhm.
all right.
That would kinda suck. You wouldn't even know what it was from. You wouldn't even know why. It's like,
Yep,
why?
exactly.
Except for the people on Hosnian Prime. They saw it coming.
Yeah. But that's because they happen to be outside and they're like, hey, I wonder what's that
Yeah.
red glow.
It's a little bright this afternoon.
It's like
It's
midnight. Why is it
right,
red?
yeah, exactly. It's like,
And it's hot.
it's right? It's like, "Oh, finally, 80-degree, oh, wait, 800-degree weather." Yeah,
Right.
well, and that's the thing. These are the kinds of scary things that you have to look at when you're looking at these basically these weapons, because you have to stop and think about how scary some of this stuff is. And I think a lot of times people get so, well, this is kind of like episode 4, that sort of thing. And it's like, no, stop and think about and just enjoy it. And I think that if people were a little less analytical right off the bat and just thought and allowed things to feel, I think that they would really get more out of it before their natural instincts to criticize something came in. All right, so my number 2.
You're number 2.
My number 2. Well, I'm gonna see your lightsaber and
Ah.
I'm gonna raise you a dark saber.
Ah.
Yeah, I mean, I had to choose this weapon because I mean, look at it. I mean, I'm just gonna say it. This is one of the cool things that I thought when I first saw. I think it made its appearance in the Clone Wars because I remember, you had Satine, you had Bo-Katan, you had all these people, Maul eventually steals it. It really comes to prominence in Rebels, that I know. But the thing that's interesting to me about the Darksaber is the fact that it was built by a Jedi.
Mhm.
It was the first and, as far as I know, only Mandalorian Jedi. And it was funny because Katie Sackhoff, the actress that plays Bo-Katan, she recently was on Michael Rosenbaum's podcast.
Mm.
And it's like a video thing. It's on YouTube if you guys want to check it out. But it was really cool because she's kind of like a really big Star Wars fan and stuff like that. And she was going into the Darksaber a little bit. And she knew about all that stuff, which I was impressed by the way. And it was something that I thought was a really cool spin on the lightsaber type of weapon. What you would probably generically just call a laser sword.
Mhm.
Because the origin is interesting, where it falls in the Star Wars lore is interesting. I just think the mechanics of the weapon, it has a very vibroblade kind of thing going.
Mm.
It doesn't seem like it's a full lightsaber style blade. And I just think it's a really cool, devastating weapon.
What made you choose this over a traditional lightsaber?
Well,
It look cooler. I got you. Vanity.
no, I mean it's not that. It's just, I mean, sure. On one hand, people could say that, lightsabers are played out, but I don't necessarily agree with that. In fact, I think that
Mhm.
as time goes on, lightsabers are actually becoming cooler.
Yeah, definitely.
But the Darksaber is a different style weapon. It's unique. It's the only one of its kind.
Mhm.
And I think that there's also more to it than what meets the eye. So I'm just really curious to see what's next for this thing. I think that it's really going to, when we see the Mandalorian season 3, I think we're going to find out more about the weapon itself. But again, when I'm looking at all these weapons, and that's why I'm putting this at number 2, because you can look, a lot of these other weapons I thought are really, really cool, right? I mean, but the Darksaber is one of those weapons that just really hit me when I first saw it, and it stuck with me. And of course, its inclusion in the Mandalorian has only fueled that even more. So I'm looking to see what this thing could be next. All
Okay.
right. All right. So now we are at both of our respective number ones. And of course,
Yeah.
you get the privilege of revealing your number 1 pick first. Before we do reveal our number 1 picks, though, don't forget, if you guys like what you're seeing and you want to see more content, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit the notification bell. All these things really help us out, and they help bring more content to you. And then, of course, you can also hit us up at Head to Head SW at all of our social media, which, of course, you can see on your screen right down there, actually. All right, so number 1, what do you got for us?
Number 1 is the Death Star.
Ah, yes. The Death Star makes its second appearance on our list. But whereas for me it was number 3, for you it's number 1. So
Yep.
go ahead, tell us why this is your number 1 pick, cuz this is interesting, because this is what I like. I wish we actually had more of the same stuff. I mean, on one hand it's cool because we both covered a bunch of different weapons. But I like it when we both pick the same thing, but they're in different spots.
Right. So the reason why it's my number 1 is because the Death Star is it's so powerful, and when you actually start to listen to or watch Rogue One, you understand, where the power comes from. That it's the same thing that powers a Jedi's lightsaber. So that to me is just instantly cool. And then on top of that, you see just kind of like how massive the stupid thing is, and like you said, it's just so powerful. But the fact that it actually can move around, and the other cool thing about it is that I didn't know before when I first saw it was that it has different settings. So in
Yeah.
Rogue One, you notice like, okay, they only fired a couple of reactors and they just destroyed a city, which was Jeddah. But then, when it came to Scarif, once again, they just destroyed, you know, the whole
Yeah,
the
that's what
whole
I meant. Crap, I said Jakku earlier.
yeah.
Yeah, I meant
But
Cheddar. I always get those mixed up. And they look kind of the same too.
true, very true. But then when you get to Scarab, once again, they just fired a couple of reactors and boom, just that whole area just kind of got washed out. But then when you see the full power, when they decide to go to Alderaan, though, and they really wanted to demonstrate, like, don't screw with us, we'll pop the whole planet. Now it's kind of like, okay, this thing is crazy. And when you think about it, you having that type of power, it's just kind of like, yeah, like you have this giant force field that's kind of like around, or this kind of force field that's kind of around the Death Star a little bit, and then you have, the thing has got tractor beams so it can pull you in if you get too close. I mean, it has everything on there from living quarters to the military to everything. It's just like on this one centralized base that you can get everything done, and it's just super cool. And you're just kind of wondering, like, man, like what else, is actually on this thing. So for me, the Death Star is just really just an imposing weapon. And especially they really show that in Rogue One, just how it kind of started peeking into the horizon, like the picture that you actually had up for the Death Star. It's just kind of slowly kind of
Yeah, I thought
moving
about
it.
reversing them because I know how much you love those shots. I almost gave myself the one that's on yours, but it was really more to do with the reasonings because I kind of felt that even though, and I agree because I think that Rogue One did for the Death Star what the prequel trilogy did for lightsabers. I
Yeah.
100% believe that because especially if you read Catalyst and then you watch or even read Rogue One, it
Yeah.
really, really brings the Death Star to life. I mean, it's
Definitely.
showing you all this stuff. It's like flying everywhere. It's, I mean, it's funny because it actually makes you go, okay, with what we saw in Rogue One, it really should have been able to get to Yavin a little quicker. I mean, I'm just saying.
Well, I guess it probably depends on where it was.
Death Star will be in range in 5 minutes. The Red Star will be. It's kind of like, dude, the thing's like not exactly taking a whole lot of time in Rogue One. In Rogue One, it's moving everywhere.
Well, maybe it was closer. Maybe Scarif was a little bit closer.
I
I don't
mean, I
know.
get it. Trust me, I understand. And the reality is, look, it was 1977 and this is kind of what George was thinking about at the time. I mean, this is one of the dangers of any franchise when you start to expand on the lore too much is that eventually you're going to trip over something that's going to somewhat disrupt the logic of the mothership, in this case the original trilogy. But it looks like Ronaldo's with us. He's
Yep.
like, "Hey guys, kind of late today, but I agree with your choices, even though I didn't see them." Well, that's all right, Ronaldo. That's the beauty of YouTube, man. You could go back and rewatch this, and if you really want to help us out, you rewatch this like 20 times. But yeah, I mean, I just think that when you're looking at something like the Death Star, and honestly, man, I could have put this at number one. I mean, this thing really, and you're probably like, yeah, but you put it at number three. But that's only because, and again, it did. The Death Star mesmerized me as a kid. And for everything that you just talked about, where in Rogue One, we really see an expansion of this thing. And I
Mhm.
think that the Death Star really gets a lot more screen time, action, and really justification for its own existence, to be honest. More so when you factor in Rogue One and everything else. I also like the fact that, especially when you read Catalyst with it, but this is even true in the Rogue One movie, that you can really understand what really went into building this thing. Because I think one of the biggest criticisms when it was just the original trilogy is like, really, this thing would cost like quadrillions of dollars to build. I mean, it would use every resource from everywhere, and they actually go into that.
Mhm.
And I think that that's just a really cool thing that you can't ignore. All right, so it's time for my number one. So my number one is
Dun,
The
dun, dun, dun.
lightsaber.
Ah,
That's right. And I had to put Mace Windu up there because
he has the
I
coolest one.
absolutely it is, man. I mean, I love the purple lightsaber. I gotta say, red's my
Yep.
favorite color, but I do love purple. Purple is definitely in like my top 3 or top 5 or whatever. And no, we're not going to do top 5 favorite colors, even though we could do top 5 favorite color lightsabers and it would go in with the show. But nah, we won't do that. But yeah, I love the lightsaber. Now, here's the thing: I had to put the lightsaber at number 1 because this is the thing, as we talked about, when you put it, because this was your number 3.
hmm
That's what's kind of funny, is
Yeah.
that our number
Ones
ones
and
are
threes.
basically our number 3s, but flip-flopped,
Yep.
which I just noticed that just now. I'm not gonna lie. I just saw that. I'm like, oh, okay. But it's interesting to me because for the same reason, I think, because when I first saw the lightsaber, and we talked about this when we were talking about it with your pick, is that the lightsaber just completely blew my mind when I first saw it.
hmm
And it has remained the single coolest weapon in all of Star Wars. And in fact, when people think of Star Wars, they think of lightsabers.
Definitely.
And there's a reason for that. And definitely, as you pointed out too, their lore was quite a bit expanded when it got to not just the prequels, but then also the Clone Wars animated series. We
hmm
got to see a little bit in Rebels as well. And so the more that we're learning about these things, the better. And with the High Republic, we see their lightsabers now.
hmm
So the lightsaber is the one thing that is uniquely Star Wars. And in fact, it even has a cool name.
Yeah, I mean, it's synonymous like with the Force lightsaber. Like those two
Yeah,
go hand in hand.
absolutely. And I don't know about you, but it absolutely drives, it's like nails on a chalkboard when people call it laser sword.
I know. That's why
And
I
the
hate it
thing
when
is,
Luke said
Lucas
it.
calls it laser sword sometimes.
That's why I hate when Luke said it. I was just like, "What do you want to stand down the
Well,
first with a laser sword?" I'm like,
yeah, and
"Oh,
I know I
Luke."
hated that too, even though to a degree there was a little bit of fan service going on in there because, George Lucas himself will call it that sometimes. And I'm like,
Yeah,
dude, you came
yeah.
up with this cool name and now you're going to call it that? Really?
Even Anakin called it that when he was like 9, but
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I
yeah,
mean,
he's
a
a kid. Yeah,
9-year-old would say that.
right,
I mean, if you're seeing that, that's kind of what a 9-year-old, they're understanding.
right. I tolerated it then, but with Luke, that kind of broke my heart.
Yeah, it just, I don't know, man. I agree. It didn't fit to me. It just, I mean, I was just sitting there thinking to myself, like, it was, it just didn't fit because he had never called it that in all the years that he was,
Playing a
dealing with the
role.
force and all that other stuff. Yeah. I just don't get it. I have to say though, I have to give an honorable mention. The ion cannon. I almost put the ion cannon up there.
I hear you. I almost put the dreadnought.
Yeah, the dreadnought was another one. The dreadnought was the other one. It's almost like if we had been doing top 10,
Oh
those
yeah.
would have been up there because I think that those were actually pretty cool weapons actually.
hmm
But, you know, anyway, guys, that's basically our top 10.
Top 5.
5. Hey, I can count. So wait, Ronaldo says the lightsaber is also my number 1. Laser sword is a lame name, man. See?
Yep.
I think honestly, if we're being objective here, lightsaber would be almost everybody's number 1.
Yeah, probably because
You
it's like
know,
when you think of Star Wars, like you said, lightsaber
yeah,
just so
when you think of Star Wars, that's what you think of, and it's just one of those things that I think is definitely the most inventive because nothing ever came before, and it was a unique thing. The whole rotoscoping, the way that they did it, and obviously they perfected the technology. I mean, they've done it so much now that, kids with a computer and like After Effects or something like that could just do it at home.
hmm
And there's been a lot of really cool fan fiction stuff based on it. But that's basically our top 5. What are your top 5 picks for your favorite weapons? definitely let us know in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notification bell. You're not going to want to miss when we have shows. We may or may not be doing our show this Friday. Have to see. Schedule's getting a little bumpy. But you can join us generally every Monday at 8 p.m. and every Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So if you hit the notification bell, you guys will get all that information. So hopefully you're going to join us the next time that you see us. Again, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the force be with you, always.